My childhood was a tapestry of gray shades, woven with fear and silence. I remember our home, a small, dilapidated shack where drafts whistled through the cracks in the walls, and the rain was a constant, unwelcome guest. My father was a phantom, a figure whose presence only became real with the acrid smell of cheap alcohol and his booming voice that shattered the fragile peace my mother and I tried to build. I hold, like an old, faded photograph, the memory of a time when my mother's face was a canvas of smiles. But that memory was quickly replaced by a new reality. Her smiles became a rarity, and her eyes carried a permanent sadness. My father's fury was a storm that always found its way home. The sound of his fists against her, the muffled whimpers, would make me tremble under the bed, my small hands covering my ears. My mother was a woman of silent strength. She would protect me, holding me tight, her body a shield against the world, and whisper promises of a better future. "One day, my little bird," she'd say, "we will fly away from here." But her wings were broken, and mine were still too young to carry us both. Over time, I learned to read the signs of the approaching storm, the clinking of bottles, his slurred speech, the way his shoulders would slump with a heavy weariness that I now know wasn't exhaustion, but a simmering rage. I would try to warn my mother, my small voice a desperate whisper. "He's coming." And her face would harden, a silent prayer passing her lips. The bruises on her arms and face were a constant reminder of our reality. She'd cover them with scarves and long-sleeved dresses, but I knew. I saw the way she winced when she moved, the flinch of terror when a loud noise echoed through the house. Fear was a living thing in our home, a constant, suffocating presence that held us captive. It was then that I made a promise to myself, a vow whispered in the darkness of my hiding place. I would never be like her. I would never let a man's anger define me. I would never allow a man's hands to be the architects of my pain. One night, the storm was particularly violent. The rain lashed against the tin roof, and my father's rage was a terrifying symphony. I heard a thud, a sharp cry, and then a deafening silence. I crept out from under the bed, my heart pounding, and saw her. My mother was on the floor, her body crumpled, a trickle of blood from the corner of her mouth. That night a part of me died. The innocence I had clung to, the hope I had secretly nurtured, was gone. My mother survived, but her spirit was extinguished. She became a shell of the woman she once was, her eyes devoid of the spark that had promised me a brighter future. I started working young, doing odd jobs, anything to bring a few pennies home. I was a child, but my hands were old, calloused from scrubbing floors and washing clothes. I was desperate to save her, to save us both from the cycle of violence that had become our inheritance. I dreamed of a different life, one where the floors were clean and laughter was genuine, not forced. A life where the only sound I heard was the wind, and not the drunken rage of a man. I looked at the big houses in the rich part of town, with their manicured lawns and bright lights, and I imagined a world where I belonged. My mother, in her quiet way, was proud of me. She would watch me with a mix of reverence and sadness, as if I were the only thing holding our world together. I saw the regret in her eyes, the silent apology for the life she had given me. But I never blamed her. I knew she had done the best she could. Years passed, and my dream became a reality, albeit a twisted one. I got a job as a domestic worker in one of those big houses, the kind of place I had only ever seen from a distance. The irony was not lost on me. I had escaped one cage only to be locked in another. The mansion was a palace of polished marble and cold indifference. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the silent judgment of the wealthy. I was a ghost in their home, a shadow that moved silently through the hallways, my presence only noted when something was amiss. My new boss, a man named Mr. Henderson, was a caricature of a man. He was loud, boisterous, and had a laugh that grated on my nerves. His wife was a fragile, elegant woman who spent her days arranging flowers and complaining about the dust I had missed. I was invisible to them both, a piece of furniture they occasionally spoke to. But Mr. Henderson's indifference was a fragile mask. Behind it was a simmering volcano of anger, a rage that was eerily familiar. It was the same rage that had haunted my childhood, the same one that had broken my mother's spirit. My stomach would knot every time he walked into a room. I met my husband, a man named David, during this period. He was a police officer, a beacon of hope in the darkness that had become my life. He was gentle, kind, and his eyes held a warmth I had never known. He was the safe harbor I had been searching for my whole life, a place where I could finally drop anchor. We fell in love, a quiet, steady love that grew in the small moments we had together. We'd talk for hours. I'd tell him about my day, and he'd listen with a patience I had never experienced. He was my protector, my confidant, my everything. I never told him about my past. The shame was a heavy cloak I wore, a secret I hid from the man I loved. I didn't want him to see the broken girl I was, the one who still flinched at loud noises and expected the worst from men. Then, a small mistake became the catalyst for a nightmare I had spent my entire life trying to avoid. I accidentally broke one of Mrs. Henderson's antique vases. It was an honest mistake, a clumsy slip of my hands, but it was enough to unleash the monster. Mr. Henderson's face contorted into a mask of pure fury. He grabbed my arm, his hand of ice, and his eyes held the same terrifying madness I had seen in my father's all those years ago. The smell of his expensive cologne was replaced by the stench of his rage. He hit me. The slap echoed through the silent mansion, a violent punctuation to my life's story. The force of it sent me sprawling to the floor, my head hitting the cold marble with a sickening thud. The world swam in a sea of stars and pain. "You worthless girl," he spat, his voice a venomous hiss. "You're all the same, you people. Careless and stupid." I lay there, my cheek on fire, the words a fresh wound on top of an old one. The years of hiding, the years of promising myself I'd never be like my mother, all came crashing down around me. He stood over me, his shadow a menacing blot against the polished floor. I saw the triumph in his eyes, the sick satisfaction of a man who had finally found a victim. Shame was a cold hand gripping my heart, a familiar and unwelcome guest. He kicked me. A sharp, brutal kick to my stomach that stole the breath from my lungs. The pain was a blinding white light, a fire that spread through my body. I curled into a ball, my hands over my stomach, a silent scream trapped in my throat. "That's what you get," he snarled, and then he was gone, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. I lay there, a broken doll on the cold floor, the silence a cruel joke after the storm. I crawled to the bathroom, my body a symphony of aches and bruises. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Her face was swollen and bruised, her eyes filled with a terror that was all too familiar. The woman I had worked so hard to become was gone, replaced by the ghost of my mother. The next few days were a blur of pain and fear. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. Every time I heard a loud noise I flinched. Every time a door slammed I jumped. The past had returned, a relentless ghost that refused to be exorcised. David noticed the change in me. He saw the way I held myself, the way I'd wince when he accidentally touched my arm. His warm eyes were filled with a concern I couldn't bear to look at. He asked me what was wrong, but the words were a lump in my throat, a confession I couldn't make. "Nothing," I'd say, my voice a thin whisper. "I'm just tired." He'd look at me, a silent question in his eyes, and I'd turn away, unable to bear the weight of his love and trust. The pain in my stomach was a constant, dull ache. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't there. But it grew, a slow, insidious burn that consumed me from the inside out. I knew something was wrong, but I was too afraid to admit it. I was pregnant. A tiny flicker of hope, a small life growing inside me, a secret I had been nurturing in the silence of my heart. But the kick, the brutal act of violence, had stolen that hope from me. The pain wasn't just physical. It was a deep, soul-crushing loss. I went to the doctor alone. The diagnosis was a death sentence for my dreams. Spontaneous abortion. The words hit me like a physical blow, a fresh wave of grief and despair. The little bird I had been nurturing was gone, its wings broken before it had a chance to fly. The trauma was a shadow that followed me everywhere. The world became a hostile place, filled with dangers I couldn't see. I would relive the moment of the assault over and over, the sound of his voice, the sting of his hand, the searing pain in my stomach. My nightmares were a cruel theater, a replay of the worst moments of my life. My father's fists, Mr. Henderson's sneer, the cold marble floor, the empty echo of a life that never got to be. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, my body trembling. I was a stranger to myself. The vibrant woman David had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by a ghost. I couldn't look at him without a wave of guilt washing over me. I felt like I was deceiving him, presenting a version of myself that was a lie. One night I couldn't take it anymore. The silence, the secrets, the crushing weight of it all. David was holding me, his arms a warm, comforting embrace, and I started to cry. The tears came in a torrent, a flood of grief and fear that had been building inside me for years. I told him everything. My childhood, my father's violence, the night my mother fell, the abuse at the hands of Mr. Henderson, the loss of our child. The words came tumbling out, a raw, painful confession. He listened, his face a mask of shock and sorrow, his grip on me never faltering. "My love," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry this happened to you." He held me tighter, his body a solid presence against my trembling one. His empathy was a balm to my wounded soul, a small flicker of light in the darkness. The next day, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The confession had been a cleansing fire, burning away the shame and the fear. I was still broken, but I was no longer silent. David, my husband, the police officer, was a man of action. He saw the injustice, the pain, the crime. He saw the lawlessness that had been allowed to flourish in the supposed sanctity of a wealthy man's home. He saw the person I was, and he saw the person I could be again. He asked me to tell him everything again, slowly, calmly. He took notes, his face a picture of grim determination. He was building a case not just for a crime, but for a life that had been stolen. I had to go to the police station. The building was a familiar place for David, but for me it was a new kind of terror. The fluorescent lights, the sterile smell, the grim faces of the officers. It was a world of justice I had never been a part of. I gave my statement, my voice shaking at first, but growing stronger as I spoke. I recounted the events of that day, the slap, the kick, the pain. The words were no longer a secret, but a testimony. The detectives were kind. They listened with a quiet respect, their faces filled with a silent rage. I felt a sense of vindication, a small, tentative hope that justice might finally be served. The physical pain had healed, but the emotional scars were still fresh. I had flashbacks, moments where I would suddenly be back in that mansion, on that cold floor, the sound of his sneer echoing in my ears. I was a prisoner in my own mind. David stood by me every step of the way. He'd hold my hand during my nightmares, his presence a shield against the ghosts of my past. He would remind me of my strength, of the woman he loved, the one who had survived so much. The legal process was slow and arduous. The defense lawyers tried to discredit me, to paint me as a liar, a gold digger. They tried to use my humble background, my work as a domestic, against me. But I had David. The day of the arrest was a blur. David left for work early, his face a serious mask. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, a mixture of fear and hope. The phone rang and it was him. "He's been arrested," he said, his voice a quiet triumph. "They found enough evidence." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a celebratory peace, but a quiet, deep-seated relief. The monster who had haunted me was finally locked away. The trial was a grueling experience. I had to face him, to look at the man who had stolen so much from me. He sat there, his face a mask of disbelief and arrogance, as if the world had played a cruel joke on him. But his power was gone. His money, his connections, they couldn't save him this time. The jury's verdict was a victory, not just for me, but for every woman who had ever been silenced, for every victim of domestic violence. Guilty. The word was a melody, a righteous anthem in the sterile courtroom. I saw the look on his face, the slow dawning of a new reality. The man who had once stood over me with such contempt was now a prisoner of his own actions. I walked out of that courtroom a different woman. I was no longer a victim, but a survivor. The past was still a part of me, a scar I would always carry, but it no longer defined me. David was there waiting for me. He held me close, his arms a safe haven. "It's over," he whispered, and for the first time in my life, I believed him. The media frenzy that followed was a strange experience. They wanted my story, my face, my testimony. I gave it, not for fame, but for the other women who might be out there, hiding in the shadows. I wanted them to know that their voices mattered. I started a new life, a life free from the ghosts of my past. I got a new job, a new home. I started to heal, slowly, one day at a time. I started talking to a therapist, a kind woman who helped me untangle the web of trauma that had been woven into the fabric of my life. She helped me understand that I wasn't to blame, that the violence I had witnessed and endured wasn't my fault. The road to recovery was long, but I wasn't alone. David was my rock, my partner in this journey. He was patient, kind, and his love was a constant source of strength. He helped me find my smile again, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. I learned to live with the memories, not to let them control me. They were a part of my story, a testament to my resilience, not a chain that held me captive. The small, broken girl I once was had grown into a woman of strength, a survivor. My journey was a testament to the power of love, of justice, and of the human spirit. I was a woman who had been broken, but I had put the pieces back together, not as a fragile vase, but as a mosaic of strength and resilience. My story wasn't one of tragedy, but of triumph. It was the story of a girl who finally found her wings and learned to fly.